Tonight we do not ride into glorious battle, nor do we stand vigil on some windswept castle wall. Tonight, we descend. You step from the bustling, straw-strewn courtyard of the manor into a lower corridor, the air growing cool and still. The clamor of hounds, hawks, and shouting men fades, replaced by the scent of old stone, damp earth, and something sharper, the tang of metal and old oil. You are not headed for the hall, or the chapel, or the stables. You are headed for the one place every squire knows will consume an entire afternoon without a shred of glory, the army. The summons was not loud, but it was final. Your knight, Sir Everard, has returned from the 3-day tournament at Lord Bellingham's fields. He is upstairs, soaking his bruises in a wooden tub and complaining about the inferior quality of the southern mead. His armor, however, is already here. And it is, in the Master Armourer's curt words, a right proper mess. Your task is not to win renown, but to erase the evidence of its pursuit. You will not be swinging a sword today, but a polishing rag. You will not be parrying blows, but coaxing out dents. Historians love to talk about the knight in shining armor, but they rarely mention the aching back, the grimy fingernails, and the soul-crushing boredom of the person who had to make it shine. Frankly, given the sheer number of steps involved in maintaining a full harness, you probably won't survive this afternoon without developing a profound philosophical stance on the nature of tedium. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The oak door to the army is stout, banded with iron, and slightly ajar. You push it open, its hinges groaning a low protest. The room within is long and narrow, lit by a pair of high, slit windows that let in 2 pillars of dusty, mote-filled light. They slice through the gloom, illuminating a scene of organized chaos. This isn't the main castle arsenal, that's a fortress in itself. This is the personal workshop for Sir Everard's retinue, and it looks like a metal beast has been dissected across every available surface. Your eyes adjust. There, on the wide central trestle table, lies the core of your nightmare. The cuirass, the backplate, the tassets for the thighs, all piled in a heavy, discordant heap. In a rustling mound on a sheet of canvas in the corner is the chainmail hauberk, looking less like a shirt of armor and more like a gigantic, murdered steel serpent. A pair of gauntlets perch on a stool like crustacean hands waiting to pinch you. And propped against the wall is the sallet helmet, its visor raised, the dark eyeslits staring at you with what you swear is accusatory emptiness. You let out a long, slow breath. The air is cool but close. You can smell the ghost of the tournament field, dried mud, horse sweat, grass stains, and the pungent, coppery smell of old blood that no amount of wiping ever fully removes. You step fully inside, your boots scuffing on the flagstones. Against the far wall are racks of tools, shelves of mysterious oils in clay pots, bundles of leather straps, and buckets of sand and water. A small, hooded charcoal forge sits cold and dark in the fireplace niche. This is your kingdom for the next several hours. It is a kingdom of immense responsibility and zero glamour. A widely accepted historical fact is that a full suit of plate armor like Sir Everard's represented a massive investment, often costing the equivalent of a small farm or a skilled artisan's yearly income. It wasn't just metal, it was a knight's mobile fortress, his status symbol, and his life insurance policy. And right now, his life insurance policy looks like it's been kicked down a hill by a disgruntled plough horse. You walk to the table, your fingers brushing the cold steel of the breastplate. The surface, which should be smooth and gracefully curved to deflect blows, is a landscape of misery. You see a deep, crumpled dent just over where the heart would be. That would be from a mace, a blow that must have rattled Sir Everard's teeth even through the padded gambeson he wore underneath. A long, screeching scrape mars the left pauldron, the shoulder guard, where a lance tip slid and gouged a path. The edges of several plates are bent and bowed. The leather straps that hold it all together are frayed, some hanging by threads, others stained dark with sweat and grime. This is the reality they don't put in the tapestries. For every minute of thrilling combat, there are hours, sometimes days, of this. The tedious, painstaking work of putting everything right. Your afternoon stretches before you, a vast desert of meticulous labor, and you haven't even picked up a tool yet. But you must begin. The next tournament is but a fortnight away, and the armor must be perfect. Sir Everard's honor, and more pressingly, his continued ability to breathe, depend on it. You roll up your sleeves, the gesture feeling comically inadequate for the task ahead. The first step is not to fix, but to truly see. You must assess the full, depressing extent of the damage. Your hands, now resting on the cold edge of the table, begin their initial survey. This isn't a glance, it's a tactile census of calamity. You start with the breastplate, hefting its surprising weight. It feels less like a piece of clothing and more like a section of ship's hull. You tilt it to catch the thin light from the window, and the damage reveals itself in stages. That central dent is the star of the show, a crater with a subtle, star-based pattern of stress lines around its edges. Running a thumb over it, you feel how the metal has been pushed inward, compromising its structural integrity. A blow that landed a finger's width higher or lower might have skipped off the more strongly curved surface. But this one hit the flatter zone over the sternum, a lesson in unlucky geometry. Next to it, a shallower, broader depression speaks of a shield bash or perhaps a fall. You trace the long, raking scrape on the pauldron, feeling the rough, raised lip of displaced steel. It's a vivid reminder that a lance strike isn't a clean puncture. It's a violent, dragging tear that can rip fittings clean off. You move down the assembly. The tassets, the laminated plates that protect the thighs, are a sorry state. One is bent almost double at its lowest hinge, likely caught on a saddle pommel or twisted in a grapple on the ground. The articulated lames, the individual horizontal plates that allow movement at the waist and knees, are pinched and misaligned. You try to flex a joint, and it grinds with a horrible, gritty stiffness, a mixture of impacted dirt and deformed metal. A lesser-known, slightly amusing historical detail is that while we picture knights as monolithic tanks, a huge amount of armor maintenance involved dealing with the sheer amount of organic gunk that found its way into the works. Not just mud and blood, but trampled grass, bits of food from messy pre-tournament feasts, horsehair, and the inevitable, pervasive grime of a body sweating under layers of wool, linen, and steel. Historians still argue whether the constant, grinding noise of dirt in armor joints was a significant distraction in combat or just a universally accepted part of the medieval soundscape. Leaving the plate for a moment, you turn to the canvas pile. Lifting a corner of the chainmail haul bag is like trying to pick up a very heavy, very dead octopus. It's immensely cumbersome. You spread a section out on the floor. The rings, each one riveted closed by a master mailmaker, are a tapestry of tiny failures. Here, a ring has been crushed flat, its neighbor torn open. There, a whole cluster of links is stretched and distorted, pulled by some immense force, perhaps a grappling hook, or simply the frantic yanking of an opponent's hand. Rust blossoms in a dozen spots like brown flowers, and the weave is matted with what you hope is just deeply embedded mud. The task of repairing this alone feels Herculean. Each broken link affects the ones around it, a cascade of failure that must be corrected ring by tiny ring. Finally, you approach the helmet. The sallet is elegantly menacing, with its long, pointed tail to protect the back of the neck. You lift it, looking into the darkened interior that still smells faintly of your night's sweat and the lavender stuffed sachet his lady wife insisted he keep in there. You run your fingers over the skull. It seems intact, But then you feel it, a subtle, dish-like depression on the left side, above the temple. It's not a crack, but a slow, deep bend. A blow from a poleaxe or the pommel of a sword, delivered with enough force to turn the world to ringing blackness for a moment, but not enough to crack the tempered steel. You lower the visor and see a fresh, bright silver scratch across the sight bar, right at eye level. Someone tried very specifically to blind him. The reality of the work settles over you, heavier than the mail. This isn't just cleaning. It's forensic restoration. Every dent, every scratch, every broken link is a story of violence narrowly survived. Your job is to quietly, methodically, edit those stories out of the metal, to prepare the page for the next brutal chapter. The assessment is complete. The sheer volume of work is daunting, but it is now known, catalogued in your mind and in the ache already beginning in your shoulders. There is no more putting it off. You turn from the damaged goods and face the wall of tools. It is time to meet your real companions for the afternoon. You step towards the tool-laden wall, your sanctuary of order in this sea of battered steel. This is where the alchemy happens, where damage is reversed not by magic, but by skill, patience, and an array of objects that look, to the untrained eye, like particularly sinister kitchen utensils. Your hands, already itching to begin, know their way around this collection. This is a squire's true arsenal. First, your eyes settle on the hammers. They are not the great, brutish things of the blacksmith's forge, meant for shaping red-hot ingots. These are smaller, more precise. You select two. One has a broad, slightly convex face of polished steel, smooth as a river stone. This is your planishing hammer, for gentle, persuasive tapping to smooth out shallow deformities without thinning the metal. The other has a rounded, ball-shaped head on one side, a chasing hammer. This is for reaching into the deeper concavities of a dent, like the one on the breastplate, to carefully push the metal back out from the inside. You weigh them in your hands, the oak handles worn shiny and smooth from years of grip. Next, the stakes. These are not financial investments, but solid blocks of iron, each with a different curved surface mounted on heavy stands. They are the anvils upon which your delicate work will be done. A dome-headed stake for the rounded curves of the breastplate and helmet. A narrow, beak-like one for working inside gauntlet fingers or the creases of articulated lames. A long, slender horn for shaping the subtle flares of armor edges. You run a palm over the cool, hard surface of the dome stake. It will become an extension of your will, a solid truth against which malleable steel must yield. Then, the files. A whole family of them, hanging by their tips from a leather strap. Bastard files with coarse teeth for rapid removal of burrs and sharp edges. Smooth, mill-cut files for finishing work. Needle files, tiny and delicate, for the intricate piercing in the helmet's visor or cleaning up the slots where straps pass through. Their rasping song will be a constant soundtrack for the next few hours. You pick up a medium file, its surface already dusted with fine gray steel shavings from its last use. The texture is familiar, a grating promise of slow, steady progress. You gather other essentials into a wooden bowl. A pot of tallow mixed with beeswax for lubrication and rust prevention. A skin of sharpening oil for the files. A lump of fine pumice stone for the initial abrasive cleaning. Several squares of rough woolen cloth, and a precious few pieces of softer, worn linen for the final polish. A bristle brush with a wooden back, its bristles splayed from vigorous scrubbing. And then, the small, crucial tools. A pair of metal snips with sharp, fine blades for trimming leather and cutting wire. A set of punches and a small, heavy riveting hammer for setting new rivets. A roll of soft iron wire for making new mail links. A hand drill with a crank, its bit frighteningly sharp. Historians still argue whether the specialized nature of these toolkits, passed from master to apprentice and constantly refined, represents the true birthplace of precision mechanical engineering in the medieval period, or if that honor belongs to the clockmakers of the cities. But your most important tools for the mail are the simplest, and the most maddening. You select 2 pairs of small, vicious-looking pliers from a hook. One pair has broad, flat jaws for gripping and bending. The other has narrow, pointed tips, perfect for opening and closing the tiny riveted rings of the hauberk. These will live in your hands for what will feel like an eternity, transferring their pinching ache into your thumb and forefinger. You flex your fingers, already anticipating the cramp. A widely accepted historical fact is that the armorer's craft was one of the most respected and highly regulated trades in a medieval town, with guilds enforcing strict standards and multi-year apprenticeships. The tools you now lay out on a clean section of the trestle table are the product of centuries of that refinement. They are not generic. They are purpose-built for the singular, vital task of preserving a fighting man's shell. You arrange them with a sense of ritual, creating a little island of readiness next to the continent of damage. The cold, inert steel of the armor awaits. The tools are your translators, your mediators. They will turn your intention into action, your careful effort into restored form. You pick up the pumice stone and a damp cloth. The glamour is gone, the fantasy stripped away. You are now a technician, a repairman. The first, and arguably most humble, task beckons. You must clean off the filth of battle before you can even see what you're truly dealing with. You reach for the most battered piece, the breastplate, and pull it towards you. The real work begins not with a bang, but with a scrubbing sound. The breastplate is the cornerstone, the keystone, the central fact of the harness. It is the wall that guards the engine of life, the heart, the lungs, the great vessels. You heft it again, settling its cold, oppressive weight against the dome-shaped stake you've positioned between your knees, bracing the metal curve against the solid iron. In this position, you are not just looking at it. You are embracing it, a clumsy, one-sided intimacy with an object designed to repel affection. You take your damp cloth, sprinkle it with grit from the pumice stone, and begin to scrub. The first pass reveals the layers. The topmost is just dried mud, a dusty brown that comes away easily, clouding the air around your hands. Beneath that is a darker, greasy smear, a mixture of old Polish horse sweat and the linseed oil used to protect the metal, now baked into a varnish-like grime. This requires more pressure, the gritty scrubbing sound a harsh whisper in the quiet room. As this layer surrenders, you reach the truth of the steel. Here, in the protected recesses and along the rolled edges, you see the original, skilled workmanship. The gentle, even hammer marks from the armorer who forged it, a texture like the skin of an orange, designed to better catch and scatter the light of the sun or the torch, a subtle defense against visual focus. But your eyes keep returning to that central dent. Now that the grime is clearing, you can appreciate its full, ugly personality. It's about the width of your palm, and deep enough that you could almost hold a small egg in the depression. The metal isn't cracked, but it has been cold worked, deformed without heat. This is both good and bad. Good, because it means the integrity of the plate is mostly intact. Bad, because cold-worked steel becomes harder and more brittle in the deformed area, fighting you every step of the way as you try to coax it back. You run your fingers around the rim of the dent, feeling the sharp transition from smooth curve to crumpled dish. This is where a blow from a steel-shod mace, swung with the full, pivoting weight of a strong man behind it, transferred its kinetic energy into a single, devastating point. The widely accepted historical fact is that such armor was remarkably effective. This dent, rather than a failure, is proof of its success. It absorbed a blow that would have shattered ribs and stopped a heart. The armor did its job perfectly. Now you must make it forget it ever happened. You set the pumice aside and pick up your ball-peen hammer. This is a dance of immense delicacy. You cannot simply wail on the dent from the outside. That would stretch and thin the metal, creating a weak spot. Instead, you must work from the inside out. You tilt the breastplate, peering into the dark interior through the armhole. You position the rounded ball of the hammer against the very center of the dent's interior, using your other hand to brace the exterior against the dome stake. You take a breath, hold it, and tap. A soft, resonant ping echoes in the hollow shell. You tap again, slightly harder. Pang. You work in a slow, outward spiraling pattern, each tap a gentle persuasion, encouraging the compressed metal molecules to relax, to expand back towards their original shape. It is a process of countless tiny encouragements, not a single heroic correction. The metal groans and creaks, a low, metallic protest with each impact. After what feels like 100 careful taps, you stop and check your progress from the outside. The deep dish has become a shallow bowl. It's an improvement, but the curve is still wrong, lumpy. You switch to your broader planishing hammer. Now you work from the outside, tapping the high spots around the depression down to meet the low spot you're raising from within. Tap, tap, tap. The sound is lighter, a crisp tick, tick, tick. You are not forcing now, but coaxing, blending, smoothing. You lose yourself in the rhythm, your world shrinking to the circle of steel under your hands, the feel of the hammer's rebound, the slowly evolving curve under your fingertips. A lesser-known historical detail is that the best armorers were, in a sense, master metal shrinkers. They understood how to move metal without adding or subtracting from it, a three-dimensional puzzle where the solution was always a perfect, body-contoured curve. Historians still argue whether the most prized armorers developed an almost intuitive, tactile understanding of metallurgy that was as much art as science, a knowledge that died with them and is impossible to fully replicate from surviving pieces alone. Your arms begin to ache, a dull bone in the shoulders and forearms from the constant, controlled motion. A bead of sweat traces a path down your temple, despite the room's coolness. But you can see it now. The dent is almost gone. What remains is a faint, shadowy unevenness in the metal's surface, a memory of the trauma that only you, the steel, and the man who swung the mace will ever know about. You lay the hammer down, your fingers stiff. The breastplate is not finished. It still needs filing, polishing, rebluing perhaps, but its structural crisis has been averted. It is a wall once more, not a crater. You lean back, stretching your spine with a series of audible pops, and look at the piece with a grim satisfaction. One down. A mere 24 more to go. You push the restored breastplate carefully to the side, a monument to the first hour of your toil, and reach for the next patient, the gouged and scarred pauldron. With the breastplate's major trauma addressed, you enter a new, less dramatic but equally demanding phase, the eradication of evidence. The pauldron, the vambraces for the forearms, the tassets, each piece is covered in a fine web of scratches, scuffs, and stains that tell the story of a violent afternoon. They are the fingerprints of combat, and your job is to wipe them clean. You gather your squares of rough wool, a fresh pot of a foul-smelling but effective paste made from vinegar, wood ash, and a little rancid fat, and prepare to wage a war of attrition against grime. You start again with the pauldron, the shoulder guard. The long, raking lance scar is the most prominent feature, but around it is a galaxy of finer scratches from sword edges, the rough texture of an opponent's shield rim, and the general abrasion of tumbling in the lists. You dab some of the gritty paste onto the wool and begin to rub in small, tight circles. The initial effect is to make everything look worse, smearing the grime into a grey, pasty mask. But as you persist, adding a few drops of water from a dipper, the paste turns darker, and beneath it, a sliver of brighter metal begins to appear. It's achingly slow. You are not sanding, not really. You are abrading on a microscopic level, using the fine ash to scour away the oxidized top layer of steel and the impurities ground into it. The rhythm is hypnotic. Rub, check, rub again. Your mind begins to wander, freed from the intense focus required for hammering. You think about the lance scar itself. The tournament lance was tipped with a coronal, a three-pronged head designed to spread the impact and reduce the chance of a fatal puncture through plate. It didn't puncture, but it gouged, transferring the kinetic energy of a charging warhorse into a wrenching, tearing motion that could dislocate a shoulder even through the armor. As you work the paste into the groove, you realize you're not going to remove it entirely. That would require filing so deep you'd risk weakening the plate. No, you will smooth its edges, polish its depths, and turn a brutal tear into a mere cosmetic flaw, a whisper of violence where once there was a shout. A widely accepted historical fact is that maintaining the polished surface of armor wasn't just about vanity or heraldic display. A smooth, polished surface was more slippery, more likely to deflect a blade point or a lance tip rather than catching it. Your tedious scrubbing is, in its way, a defensive act. You move on to the vambrace. Here, the damage is different. The lower arms take a beating in close combat, used to block and bash. The steel is covered in a confetti of tiny dings and mars, the result of 100 frantic parries. You rub, and the slow revelation of the metal beneath feels like an archaeological dig. You uncover the finer, parallel scratches from wire-edged gauntlets, the deeper pits from the impacts of rondel daggers designed to punch through mail. It is a logbook of close-quarters terror. You swap your wool cloth for a fresh one as it blackens. The room fills with the low, shushing sound of cloth on metal, a sound like a distant, restless sea. Your shoulders ache from the repetitive motion. You pause to flex your fingers, which are stained gray and beginning to chap from the acidic paste. A lesser-known, slightly amusing historical detail is that armor cleaners and polishers were in constant demand, and their recipes for polishing compounds were closely guarded secrets, often involving bizarre ingredients like urine, for its ammonia, or finely ground fish bones. The mixture you're using is the Armorous standard issue, and its eye-watering vinegar smell is now embedded in your nostrils, likely for the rest of the day. You wonder, idly, if the master armorer has a more pleasant, secret recipe he keeps for the Lord's own gear. After what feels like an age, you rinse the pieces with clean water from a bucket, drying them with a coarse linen rag. The transformation is subtle but profound. The steel is no longer a dull, dead gray. It has a soft, matte gleam, like a moonlit cloud. The deep scars are still visible as darker lines in the metal, but they are clean now, part of the object's history rather than its present filth. The myriad of small scratches has been blended into a uniform, satiny texture. It's not a mirror finish, that comes later, with hours more work with finer and finer abrasives, eventually using the soft, worn linen and a final buff with a clean, dry rag, but it is honest. It is the steel itself, revealed. Historians still argue whether the obsession with polished armor in the late medieval period was driven more by practical battlefield concerns or by the rise of courtly pageantry and the need for dazzling display, even on the field. As you look at the clean, honest gleam of the pauldron, you suspect it was probably both, with men like you stuck in the middle, making the dazzle possible one tedious circle at a time. You set the polished pieces aside on a clean sheet of linen. They look less like discarded junk and more like components of something powerful, awaiting reassembly. A small flicker of pride warms your chest, quickly extinguished by the sight of the massive, tangled heap of chainmail still waiting for you on the canvas floor. The plate was a war against surfaces. The mail, you know, will be a war of attrition, a battle fought one tiny, interlinked ring at a time. You turn your back on the satisfying, solid geometry of the plate armor and face the amorphous, whispering mound of the hallback. It is the antithesis of your previous work. Where plate is about broad curves and definitive hammer strikes, mail is about tiny, interconnected failures. Where plate defends with rigid deflection, mail defends with fluid absorption. And where fixing plate is sculpture, fixing mail is knitting. If knitting were done with iron wire and pliers and could drive a person to the brink of quiet madness, you drag the canvas further into the light and kneel beside it, the cold of the flagstones seeping through your hose. Up close, the hallberg is a universe of tiny, interlocked circles. Each ring is stamped from a flat sheet of iron, its ends overlapped, punched with a tiny hole, and then riveted with a pin smaller than a grain of rice. The work of the mail maker is one of inhuman patience, and now you must match it. Your task is threefold: find the broken links, remove them, and weave in new ones. It sounds simple. It is the definition of tedium incarnate. You begin your survey, running your hands over the cold, heavy fabric. Your fingers learn to read it. A healthy section has a smooth, pliable drape, the rings moving against each other with a soft, metallic hiss. A damaged area is stiff, tangled, or gapes open like a metal wound. You find your first casualty, a ring that has been crushed flat, its two neighbors bent awkwardly into the space it once occupied. You take your narrow-tipped pliers in one hand and the flat-jawed ones in the other. With a surgeon's delicacy, you grip the ruined link. The trick is not to just yank it out. You must carefully open the two adjacent, healthy rings that pass through it, sliding their riveted seams apart just enough to release the broken one. The pliers creak. The metal groans a tiny, high-pitched complaint. With a final, minute wiggle, the crushed ring falls free into your palm, a little iron corpse. Now you must create a replacement. You take a length of the soft iron wire from your roll. It is not springy like modern steel, it is malleable, designed for this. You coil it tightly around a hardened steel rod called a mandrel, which is precisely the diameter of the original links. Using your snips, you cut the coil, creating a handful of open rings, each one a perfect circle except for the tiny gap. This part is almost pleasant, the creation of fresh, unblemished components. But next comes the riveting. You place one of your new open rings on a small, heavy anvil that fits in the palm of your hand. You overlap the ends, align them perfectly, and with a punch and a tap from your tiny hammer, you make a dimple in both layers. Then, you select a pre-made rivet, a sliver of iron wire even finer than the ring itself, place it in the dimpled hole, and with a careful, squeezing pressure from your flat pliers, you mash the ends of the rivet, permanently closing the ring. One down. You'll need dozens. The widely accepted historical fact is that a full hallberg like this could contain anywhere from 15,000 to 25,000 individual rings. The mind balks at the number. Yours certainly does, as you now take your newly riveted ring and begin the process of weaving it into the void you created. You must open two existing rings in the garment, thread the new one through them, and then close it again, linking it to its new neighbors. It requires your pliers in your teeth, your hands contorted, your eyes straining in the dim light. The first repair takes you 10 minutes. The second, slightly less. By the fifth, you've settled into a grim, rhythmic pace. Find, remove, craft, weave. The world shrinks to the few square inches of metal fabric in your lap, the feel of the cold rings, the squeak and click of your tools. A lesser-known historical detail is that while we imagine mail as a constant, heavy burden, a well-made hallberg was remarkably flexible and distributed its weight across the shoulders and hips. The real burden, as you're discovering, was maintenance. Rust was the eternal enemy. A single spot of rust could weaken a ring, which would fail under stress, transferring tension to its neighbors and creating a cascade of failure. Exactly what you're repairing now. Historians still argue whether soldiers in the field carried small mail repair kits, much like a modern soldier might carry a sewing kit, or if this level of detailed work was strictly the domain of the camp armor or a dedicated squire in permanent residence. Given the specialized tools and the focus required, you're voting for the latter as your fingertips grow numb and a persistent ache settles deep in the meat of your thumb. Time loses meaning. The light from the high windows shifts, the bright pillars softening and slanting as the afternoon wears on. Your pile of little iron corpses grows. Your bowl of freshly riveted rings dwindles, and you have to stop to coil and cut more wire, your hands begging for the respite even as your mind screams at the delay. The repetitive, minute labor is hypnotic. You are not a squire dreaming of glory. You are a loom, mechanically repairing the metallic weave that might, one day, stop a dagger from finding the gap under your knight's arm. It is the most boring, most vital thing you will do all week. You don't look up until you feel a cramp like a hot knife in your neck, and realize you've been hunched over, barely breathing, for what might have been 2 hours. A large, tangled section near the hauberk's hem is now smooth and fluid. The repair is invisible to anyone but you. You have reclaimed a patch of territory from entropy, one rivet at a time. You stretch your back with a groan, the vertebrae popping like a string of firecrackers. The hauberk is perhaps a quarter done. You set the pliers down, your fingers refusing to straighten fully, and decide you need a different kind of problem. Something with a more immediate, hammer-sized payoff. Your eyes drift to the helmet, with its hidden, sinister dent. That, you think, you can handle. The helmet feels different in your hands than the breastplate. It is more personal, more intimate. The breastplate guards the body, but the helmet guards the mind, the senses, the seat of consciousness itself. You lift the sallet, your fingers slipping into the eye slit from the inside, feeling the subtle, dish-shaped depression on the left temple that your initial inspection revealed. From the outside, it's almost invisible, a slight softening of the curve. From within, pressed against the dome stake, you can feel it clearly. A yielding where there should be only unyielding strength. This is where the world went dark and ringing for Sir Everard. This is the dent that nearly ended him. Helmet repair is a special kind of nerve-wracking. The metal of a sallet skull is often thinner and more finely shaped than the body armor, heat-treated to a springy hardness to better absorb and distribute impact. Hammering it carelessly can ruin that temper, making it either too brittle or too soft. You cannot afford to turn your knight's primary defense into his primary liability. You need to apply just enough pressure, just enough heat, to persuade the metal back without breaking its spirit. You stoke the small charcoal forge in the fireplace niche. It's not for heavy forging, but for localized heating. You blow on the coals with a bellows until a small, focused bed of glowing orange embers forms. You take a long, slender steel rod called a heat iron and place its tip in the fire until it glows a dull red. This is your indirect tool. You won't put the helmet itself in the fire. You will use the heated rod to transfer warmth precisely to the damaged area from the inside. It's a slower, more controlled method. While you wait for the iron to heat, you examine the rest of the helmet. The bright scratch across the visor's sight bar is superficial, a worry for the files and polishers later. The hinges for the visor are sound, but the locking pin that secures it in the down position is bent. You make a mental note: straighten pin, ensure smooth operation. A visor that jams shut, or worse, open, is a death sentence. The heat iron is ready. You brace the helmet firmly on the dome stake, the dent positioned over the curve. Carefully, you insert the glowing tip of the rod through the eye slit, maneuvering it until it presses against the exact center of the interior depression. You hear a faint sizzle as it contacts the metal, smell the faint, acrid scent of burning dust and old oil. You hold it there, counting slowly. The goal is to anneal the stressed metal slightly, to relax its hardened crystalline structure just enough to allow it to be reshaped without cracking. You pull the iron out, the spot inside now a faint, shadowy blue from the heat. Immediately, you take your ball-peen hammer and, working from the outside, begin a gentle, rhythmic tapping around the periphery of the dent. Tick, tick, tick. The sound is higher-pitched, more musical than the work on the breastplate. You are not pushing the dent out from the center. You are chasing it, encouraging the still cool, surrounding metal to pull the heated, softened area back into its proper shape. It's a subtle art. You work in a spiral, your taps feather-light, your eyes glued to the evolving curve. After a dozen passes, you stop. The metal has cooled. You reheat the iron, apply it again, and repeat the process. Heat, then encourage. Patience is everything. A widely accepted historical fact is that medieval armorers employed a whole suite of heat treatment techniques, from quenching in water or oil to tempering in ovens, to produce steel with varying degrees of hardness and flexibility in different parts of a harness. The skull of a helmet needed to be hard enough to resist penetration but have enough give to absorb a blow without shattering. It was a balance few metalsmiths outside of the Armorers Guild could achieve. On the third heating, you feel a shift. The metal, with a soft pop you feel more than here, resumes its original, graceful arc. The depression is gone. You run your fingers over the spot. It is perfectly smooth, seamlessly integrated back into the helmet's contour. You let out a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. The structural integrity is restored. But your work isn't done. Now you must address the interior. That spot of blued metal is a weak point. You take a small, felt-covered pad and a pot of fine, clean sand. You heat the iron once more, not as hot, and press it gently against the interior spot, then immediately press the sand-filled pad against it from the outside. This process, called pack hardening, helps to re-temper the steel, restoring some of its strength. It's not as good as a full reheat treat in a proper furnace, but it will serve. Finally, you turn to the bent visor pin. A lesser-known, slightly amusing historical detail is that helmet malfunctions were a common and deeply embarrassing source of injury on and off the battlefield. Tales exist of knights stumbling about blindly because their visors jammed shut, or having to fight with one hand holding a loose helmet on their head. You straighten the pin in a vise, file its ends smooth, and test the mechanism. The visor snaps down with a satisfyingly solid clack and locks in place. You lift it. It rises smoothly. You do this a dozen times, ensuring absolute reliability. Historians still argue whether the frequent artistic depictions of knights in battle with their visors up was a stylistic choice by artists wanting to show faces, a reflection of the need for better vision and air, or grim evidence of how often the locking mechanisms failed, forcing men to fight with their faces exposed. As you listen to the dependable clack hiss of Sir Everard's visor, you hope, for his sake, that it was mostly the artist's. You set the helmet aside, its crisis averted, its hidden weakness cured. It stares blankly at the wall, once more a vessel of potential consciousness rather than a record of its near extinguishment. Your back protests as you stand. The light in the room has taken on the rich, golden hue of late afternoon. Shadows are growing long in the corners. You have been at this for hours. The plate gleams dully, the mail is partially healed, the helmet is whole. But now you must turn to the sinews that hold it all together, the leather. And you know from the frayed, sweat-stiffened ends dangling from every piece, that it is going to be a battle of its own. Leather. It is the silent partner in the symphony of steel, the flexible connective tissue that turns a pile of metal plates into a wearable suit of armor. And right now, it is the rotten, frayed, and sweat-sodden weak link in your entire endeavor. You gather the pieces of plate around you and begin the autopsy of their strapping. The leather is thick, vegetable-tanned cowhide, once supple and strong. Now, after years of sweat, rain, friction, and the relentless pull of gravity and impact, it is failing at every junction. You start with the arming points on the breastplate, the small, punched holes along its edges where leather laces, called points, would attach it to the underlying gambeson and link it to the backplate and tassets. The existing points are dark, stiff as wood, and frayed to hairy wisps. With a small knife, you cut them away, the dry leather cracking with a sound like dead twigs. The holes themselves are grimy. You take a pointed awl and ream each one clean, a tiny spiral of compacted filth curling out from the steel. From a bundle on the shelf, you select a length of new, waxed calfskin lace. It is pale and supple, smelling of beeswax and tannin. You cut a length, singe the end in the candle flame to prevent unraveling, and begin the tedious process of relacing. It's like threading a needle. If the needle was a cold piece of steel you were hugging to your chest and the thread was as thick as a quill. Your fingers, already sore from the mail, fumble with the stiffness of the new lace. You push, pull, tie off a knot, trim the end. 1 point done. Only about 40 more to go, across all the pieces. Next, the articulated straps. These are the heavy-duty hinges of the armor. The tassets are connected to the fold, the skirt of plates at the waist, by internal leather straps that allow them to swing with the leg. One is completely severed, the leather torn clean through from what must have been a vicious kick or a fall. The others are so stretched and deformed they are useless. You unpick the old rivets holding them in place, the brass burrs spinning free. You measure against the old straps, then cut new ones from a sheet of heavier harness leather, using a metal template to ensure consistency. Punching new holes for the rivets is a satisfyingly decisive thump with the drive punch and mallet. But then comes the wrestling match. You have to hold the new strap in its exact position inside the steel lames, align the hole in the leather with the hole in the steel, insert the brass rivet, place the whole ungainly assembly on the small anvil, and then hold a backing tool, called a hold-on, against the rivet head while you hammer the soft brass tail on the other side, mushrooming it to lock everything in place. It requires 3 hands. You have 2. You use your knee, your chin, a wooden clamp, anything to hold the pieces in alignment as you deliver a precise, moderate tap with the riveting hammer. Tap, tap, tick. The brass flattens, gripping leather and steel in a permanent embrace. You do this 8 times for 1 tasset. Your hands are slick with sweat now, the smell of warm leather and metal filling your immediate air. A widely accepted historical fact is that the transition from mail to full-plate armor in the 14th and 15th centuries was made possible not just by advances in metallurgy, but by developments in tailoring and leatherworking. The complex articulation of plates required a sophisticated understructure of straps and pivots, turning the armor into part metalsmith, part couturier. The worst of it is the strap that secures the pauldron to the breastplate. It's a wide, buckled affair that must allow for the rotation of the shoulder while bearing immense weight. The old buckle is brass, tarnished but serviceable. The tongue of the strap, however, is torn. You have to carefully unpick the stitching that holds the buckle in place, preserve the metal, and stitch it onto a new tongue of leather. This requires needle and wax thread. The leather is so tough the needle fights you, requiring you to pre-punch the stitching holes with an awl and then force the needle through, pulling the thread with a grunt each time. A lesser-known historical detail is that squires and armorers maintained a small arsenal of specialized needles, thimbles made of thick leather or even bronze, and palm guards to push needles through stubborn material. Your own palm is red and sore by the time you've made the final, tight, cross-stitched knot. You buckle the new strap, testing its fit. It holds firm, the brass tongue clicking securely into place. The simple, functional sound is a tiny victory. You are drenched in a different kind of sweat now, not the cool anxiety of precise hammering, but the hot, physical exertion of a labor. Your tunic is damp under your arms and down your back. The golden light from the windows is beginning to redden. Historians still argue whether the constant, demanding maintenance of leather fittings, which could rot or become brittle far faster than the steel, was a greater logistical burden for a campaigning army than the repair of the metal itself. As you look at the pile of cracked, discarded old straps and the gleaming new ones now adorning the steel, you'd believe it. The steel only needs fixing when it's struck. The leather is perpetually dying from the inside out, killed by the very body it protects. You take a long drink from a leather water bottle, the warmish liquid doing little to refresh you. You wipe your brow with the back of a grimy wrist. The armor is transforming. It is no longer a wounded veteran, it is becoming a rehabilitated soldier, its bones set, its skin cleaned, its tendons replaced. It lies about you in pieces, but they are now functional pieces. They await only final assembly and the last, mind-numbing stage, the final polish. But before that, your body demands a moment. You slump onto a low stool, the silence of the army pressing in on you, and for the first time this long afternoon, you have a moment to think not about the how, but the why of it all. The silence, now that you've stopped moving, is profound. It's not empty. It's thick with the ghosts of your labor, the lingering scent of vinegar, hot metal, warm leather, and old stone. You sit on the stool, your hands resting on your knees, palms up. They are a map of the afternoon, gray-stained, with a fresh blister rising on your right thumb from the pliers, and red pressure marks from the hammer handles etched into your fingers. You flex them slowly, feeling each ache as a testament to a specific task. In this quiet, your mind, which has been a narrow beam focused on dents and rings and stitches, finally widens its aperture. You think not of your knight, but of the countless others like you, in rooms just like this, across the manors and castles of Christendom. This isn't a unique torment, it's a universal duty. The widely accepted historical fact is that a knight's military household, his mesney, was a small, mobile economy, and the maintenance of its equipment was a continuous, background hum of activity, as constant as the need for food or fodder. Far from the glamour of the charge, the true life of a martial retinue was built on this, the endless cycle of care and repair. For every hour spent in the lists or on campaign, several more were spent in preparation and recovery. The squire polishing armor, the fletcher smoothing arrows, the groom checking hooves, the page mending tunics. It was an ecosystem of upkeep, and you are currently planted in its most metallic corner. Your eyes drift over your work. The cleaned and mended pieces no longer look like casualties. They look like what they are, sophisticated technology. This thought pulls you from your fatigue into a strange, detached curiosity. How often was this actually done? The tapestries show knights in gleaming suits, but they never show the grimy, exhausted boy in a cellar making them gleam. You know Sir Everard trains in his armor weekly, weather permitting. Each session requires a basic check and wipe down. But a full, deep repair like this? It would follow every major engagement, every tournament, any event where the armor was truly tested. In a season of active campaigning, this scene in the army could be a weekly occurrence. The thought is exhausting. A lesser-known historical detail is that wealthy knights often employed a dedicated armorer within their household, a skilled professional who would oversee this work and train the squires. Sir Everard is prosperous, but not a great lord. You are his dedicated armorer, his polisher, his repairman. It is one of your core duties, as fundamental as knowing how to care for his horses or manage his shield. This leads your thoughts down a darker path. You've repaired the damage you can see. But what of the damage you can't? The metal has been stressed. That breastplate dent, that helmet concussion, they have changed the steel on a molecular level, creating points of hidden fatigue. You've annealed and worked them, but are they truly as strong as they were? Or are you just painting over a crack in a foundation? Historians still argue whether the constant repair and reworking of armor pieces over a knight's lifetime gradually degraded their protective qualities, leading to a hidden arms race where armor had to be made thicker and heavier to account for this inevitable decline, or if the skills of the armors were sufficient to restore near-original integrity. Sitting here, looking at the hammered-out dent, you feel the weight of that scholarly debate in a very physical way. Sir Everard's life may hinge on the correctness of one side or the other, and you are the one who has, essentially, cast the vote with your ball-peen hammer. The reddening light from the window falls across the helmet's visor. It's a somber thought. All this tedious work is a hedge against mortality. Every polished surface is meant to turn a blade, every mended ring is meant to stop a point, every tightened strap is meant to hold the fortress together in the moment of crisis. You are not a warrior. You are a mechanic for the machine of war. Your battlefield is this trestle table, your enemy is entropy. And entropy, you have learned today, is a relentless, patient foe. It doesn't attack with a great shout, it infiltrates with a speck of rust, a stretched fiber, a nearly invisible stress line. Your victory is always temporary. The armor will go out again. It will be struck, scraped, soaked, and solid. And it will come back to this room, or one like it, and the whole quiet, unglamorous war will begin anew. You take a deep breath, the cool hour balm. The moment of philosophical exhaustion passes, replaced by a grim, professional acceptance. This is the job. This has always been the job. You are a link in a chain as interconnected as the mail hauberk on the floor, part of a tradition of maintenance that stretches back centuries. Your back still aches, your hands still throb, and a significant portion of the mail still awaits your pliers. But the pause has served its purpose. You understand the scale of the enterprise you are part of, the unending background labor that made the fleeting foreground heroics possible. It doesn't make the work lighter, but it makes it mean something. You push yourself up from the stool, your joints complaining. The light is fading. There is still science to be done, and a great deal of repetition to endure. You turn your gaze to the cold, dark maw of the small forge. It's time to apply some serious heat. The forge, now a bed of pulsating orange embers, represents a shift in your relationship with the steel. Until now, you've been a persuader, a cleaner, a weaver, a surgeon. Now, you become a physicist. You are going to deliberately alter the very nature of the metal to serve your purpose. The patient is the left pauldron, the shoulder guard with the deep, screeching lance scar. While you've polished the gouge, the metal around it is work-hardened and stressed from the impact. To truly restore its resilience, you need to anneal it, heat it to a critical temperature and let it cool slowly, softening it so it can be lightly reworked and then rehardened. This is not blacksmithing, it's more like a very precise, localized bake-off. You bank the coals to create an even heat. Using a pair of long, fire-blackened tongs, you gingerly position the pauldron over the glow. You don't plunge it in, you hover it, letting the radiant heat wash over the damaged area. You watch the metal carefully. It begins to change color, a process that is your only thermometer. First, a faint straw yellow appears, then a deeper gold, then a magnificent, royal purple that ripples across the steel like oil on water. You are aiming for a full, deep blue, the sign that the metal has reached the correct temperature for annealing, where its crystalline structure relaxes. The play of colors on the steel is hypnotic, a beautiful, fleeting rainbow born of destruction and repair. A widely accepted historical fact is that medieval armors, without pyrometers or temperature gauges, relied entirely on this visual color scale, from faint yellows to deep blues and finally to cherry reds for forging, to judge the state of the steel. Their eyes were their most calibrated instruments, trained over a lifetime. You see the deep blue wash over the gouged area and the immediate surround. Quickly, you pull the pauldron from the heat and place it not in water, but into a bucket of dry, fine sand. This is the slow cooling part. The sand insulates the piece, allowing it to cool over many minutes, which keeps the metal soft and workable. The science here is ancient, intuitive, and absolutely critical. If you quenched it in water now, it would become glass hard and catastrophically brittle. Patience is everything. You leave the piece buried in its sandy grave and turn to the next application of heat. One of the gauntlets has a malformed knuckle plate, a gadling, bent inwards from a crushing blow. It's too cramped a space for cold hammering. You need to make it malleable. You take your slender heat iron and get it glowing again. Carefully, you insert it inside the closed gauntlet, pressing it against the interior of the bent gadling. You watch as the metal on the outside begins its color change. At a dull red heat, you remove the iron, quickly place the small, beak-shaped stake inside the knuckle, and with a few light, precise taps from your smallest hammer, you nudge the dented plate back into its rounded shape. The heat allows the metal to move with minimal force, preserving its thickness. It's over in seconds. You dunk the gauntlet in a bucket of water nearby, not to harden it, but simply to cool it enough to handle. The sizzle and cloud of steam are viscerally satisfying. But heat is not just for fixing, it's for finishing. You take a smaller, cleaner piece of charcoal from the fire's edge, one that is glowing but not flaming. You hold it with tongs and, with a soft leather pad to protect your hand, you gently rub the glowing charcoal over the surface of the freshly annealed pauldron, now cool and lifted from the sand. This is bluing. The carbon from the charcoal, combined with the controlled heat, creates a thin, dark oxide layer on the steel. This layer provides a modest amount of corrosion resistance, but more importantly for a knight, it creates a dark, uniform background. On this dark field, the polished raised surfaces you will create later will shine all the brighter. It's not just protection, it's aesthetics and psychology, making the armor look more formidable, its contours more defined. A lesser-known historical detail is that the control of heat extended to the very workshop itself. Many castle armories were built with specific orientations or had their forges placed against north-facing walls to ensure consistent, shadow-free light for judging those critical color changes throughout the day. Your little forge in its niche doesn't have that advantage, but you've learned to account for the changing light. As you blue the pauldron, the room is filled with a warm, smoky scent, a primal smell of transformation. Historians still argue whether the specific colors achieved on armor, blues, blacks, even russet browns, were purely the result of functional heat treatments and applied finishes like paint or boiled linseed oil, or if they sometimes indicated the geographic origin of the steel or the secret recipes of particular armorers' guilds, a form of hidden branding. You set the blued pauldron aside. It looks different now, darker, more serious, its scar now a shadow in a midnight field rather than a silver tower. The science part is over. The forge can be left to die back to ashes. Your body is tired, but your mind is alert, settled into the rhythm of the work. The major interventions are complete. What stretches ahead is no longer repair, but refinement. The final transformation from a collection of mended parts into a single, formidable whole. But that path is paved with something far more draining than dramatic hammer strikes or the application of fire. Pure, unadulterated, mind-numbing repetition. You look at the files, the polishing cloths, and the vast expanse of metal yet to be brought to a final gleam. You take a deep breath, and step into the grind. The next phase has no drama. It has no critical color changes, no satisfying pop of realigned metal, no clever weaving of rings. It is pure process. You pick up a bastard file, its coarse teeth eager to bite, and you begin to walk its edge along every rim, every burr, every sharp spot left by hammering or impact on the plate armor. The sound is a harsh, grating geep, geep, geep. You work methodically, turning each piece in your hands, running the file along the steel with steady, forward pressure, then lifting it for the return stroke. Your world narrows to the feel of the vibration traveling up your arm, the sight of fine, curly steel shavings peeling away and collecting in little gray piles on the table like metallic sawdust. You file the edges of the breastplate where they were bent, restoring a smooth, rolled line. You file the rough lip of the lance scar on the pauldron until it is a smooth valley. You file the bent corners of the tacit lames until they move freely again, without catching. It is monotonous, but there is a rhythm to it, a mechanical meditation. Jeep. Turn. Jeep. Check. Jeep. Your mind, having expanded during your break, now collapses again, but not into focus, into a kind of blankness. You are not thinking about the history of armor, or the science of steel, or the mortality of your knight. You are thinking about the next stroke of the file. And then the next. And then the next. After the coarse file comes the smoother, mill-cut file. Its teeth are finer, its bite less aggressive. Its sound is a softer shish, shish, shish. This is for removing the scratches left by the first file, for blending your repair work seamlessly into the original surface. You work with a lighter touch now, your movements more fluid. You are not shaping, you are smoothing. You file until your fingertips, pressed against the metal, can no longer detect a transition between the repaired area and the original plate. The tactile world is everything. Sight is secondary to feel. Then, you trade the file for abrasive. You take a piece of the roughest wool cloth, dip it in a slurry of water and fine, sifted river sand, and begin to rub. This is where the last vestiges of tool marks vanish. The sound is a low, wet, grinding whisper. Your arm moves in broad, circular sweeps, then long, straight strokes, following the contours of the metal. The slurry turns a dirty gray. You wipe it clean with a dry rag, inspect the surface under the fading light, and see a uniform, satin matte finish. It is honest, clean, but dull. It lacks the iconic luster. So you begin the polishing proper. You take another cloth, a softer one, and a pot of a finer abrasive paste, this one made from crushed limestone mixed with oil. The circles you make are smaller, tighter, the pressure more even. The dull gray begins to give way to a soft sheen. You polish the breastplate's central curve until it reflects the room's dim window as a blurry rectangle of light. You polish the dome of the helmet until it holds a warped, fisheye reflection of your own tired face. The shish-shish sound of cloth on metal is now the only sound in the world, a gentle, hypnotic mantra. A widely accepted historical fact is that a high polish on armor, while dazzling, was not the default state for most men-at-arms on campaign. This level of finish was for tournaments, for courtly display, for the very wealthy, or for occasions where intimidation through splendor was part of the strategy. The everyday wear of a soldier was more likely to be a brushed or satin finish, or even painted or covered with a cloth surcoat to prevent rust and sun glare. You are creating tournament-grade shine, because Sir Everard has another tournament to attend. The repetition is brutal in its constancy. Your shoulder burns with a deep, muscular fatigue. The skin on your fingertips feels thin and hot. But there is a strange peace in it. The complexity is gone. There is only the next circle, the next stroke. You are a machine of restoration, and your programming is simple. Rub, check, rub again. A lesser-known historical detail is that the final mirror polish was often achieved using the palm of the hand and the softest, most worn linen, the natural oils of the skin providing the final buffing agent. You find yourself doing this instinctively on the curved surface of a vambrace, your palm moving in swift, warm arcs until the steel reflects the grain of the wood on the ceiling above you. Historians still argue whether the famous white armor of the late medieval period was kept perpetually mirror-bright by an army of dedicated squires, or if it was more often a temporary state achieved for specific events, with knights and men-at-arms largely content with a more practical, less reflective surface the rest of the time. You lose all sense of time. The reddish gold of late afternoon deepens into the violet of early evening. You have to light a tallow candle and set it on the table, its guttering flame doubling itself in the curves of the polished greaves. The dance of light on the metal is your only reward, a sign that the mind-numbing repetition is having an effect. The pieces arrayed around you no longer look like tools of war. In the candlelight, they look like artifacts, sculptures, impossibly intricate and beautiful. The violence they are designed for is hidden beneath a liquid skin of light. You set down your final polishing cloth, your arms leaden. The metal gleams, soft and deep in the candle flame. The repetitive frontier has been crossed. The armor is no longer just mended, it is presentable. It is, for the first time all day, silent. And in that quiet, you hear something new. The sound of the world outside your stone cocoon, carrying fragments of the life this armor exists to defend and define. The sound is faint at first, a distant murmur seeping under the heavy oak door. You've been in your silent, tactile world for so long that the outside noises feel like an intrusion. You pause, a polished kuta, the sharp elbow guard, in your hand, and listen. It's the retainers and men-at-arms of the household, finished with their day's duties, passing through the lower courtyard on their way to the evening meal in the hall. Their voices are rough, relaxed, peppered with laughter and the casual profanity of soldiers at ease. You can't make out every word, but fragments drift in, painting vivid, unvarnished pictures of the world your repaired armor is about to re-enter. And I tell you, the Southern Knight's horse shied at the last second, saved his miserable life. One voice barks, followed by a round of guffaws. Another chimes in, complaining about the quality of the ale at the last tournament, calling it weak as a maid's kiss. Then, a more serious tone, saw them carrying young Fitzwalter off the field. His visor was pierced clean through. Luckier than he deserves. A grim silence follows this statement, broken only by the clatter of a wooden bucket being set down. You listen, the cool steel in your hands suddenly feeling less like an artifact and more like an impending reality. These men are talking about the consequences of the very events you are erasing from the metal. The dent you hammered out could have been the one that saved a life. The gouge you polished could have been the one that preceded a fatal thrust. Your work, so quiet and meticulous, exists in direct conversation with their loud, brutal world. A widely accepted historical fact is that the medieval tournament was not the stylized, chivalric pageant of later romance, but a brutally dangerous training exercise and popular sport, often with few rules beyond don't kill the opponent intentionally. Serious injuries and accidental deaths were common, a risk accepted for the sake of training, prestige, and prize money. You hear the master-at-arms, a man named Godric, growl a command about checking spearheads before drill tomorrow. His voice is like grinding stone. You've polished the surfaces that will deflect those spearheads. You hear two grooms arguing about a lame palfrey, their dispute a mundane counterpoint to the martial chatter. This is the ecosystem, the glory and the gossip, the death and the drudgery, the care of weapons and the care of livestock, all intertwined. You are not separate from it, down here in your dim workshop. You are its foundation. The knight can ride forth because you have ensured his shell is whole. The men can joke about near misses because the armor, most of the time, does its job. A snippet of conversation freezes your polishing cloth mid-swipe. Sir Everard? Aye, he took a pounding. That final pass against the Breton was a ugly thing. Shield split, horse stumbled. They say he walked like an old man for 2 days after. The voice is matter-of-fact. You look at the breastplate, now flawless. You had known it was bad, but hearing it contextualized, the split shield, the stumbling horse, adds a new dimension to the damage. It wasn't a single, clean blow in a vacuum. It was part of a sustained, brutal beating at the end of a long, exhausting day. The armor didn't just fail in one spot, it was overwhelmed. Your repair job feels suddenly more significant and more fragile. You weren't just fixing a dent, you were rebuilding a defense that had been systematically tested to its limit. A lesser-known historical detail is that the social world of the manor or castle was intensely hierarchical but also remarkably transparent. Everyone, from the lord to the lowliest scullion, knew everyone else's business, especially when it came to performance in war or tournament. Success and failure were public currency. Sir Everard's walking like an old man would have been noted, discussed, and likely used to gauge his odds in future wagers. By restoring his armor to perfection, you are, in a small way, helping to restore his social capital, erasing the visible evidence of a hard time. Historians still argue whether the intense pressure of this public scrutiny drove knights to take greater risks on the field to prove their continued vigor, or if it fostered a culture of careful, pragmatic professionalism where maintaining one's gear, and one's reputation, was a survival strategy. The voices fade as the men move on, their footsteps echoing away. The silence returns, but it's different now. It's no longer just the silence of concentration, it's the silence after eavesdropping, filled with the echoes of the stories you've heard. The armor around you is no longer a set of technical problems. It is a participant in an ongoing, dangerous story. You look at the helmet, its eye-slit dark. You think of young Fitzwalter, his visor pierced. A fraction of an inch, a slight difference in the angle of a blow, a tiny weakness in the steel you might have missed. The margins are terrifyingly thin. You shake your head, physically trying to dispel the thought. Morbidity has no place in the army. Your job is practical, not philosophical. You finish the final buff on the cutter and place it with the other polished pieces. The candle flame wavers, casting long, dancing shadows of gauntlets and greaves on the stone wall. The world outside has moved on to supper and rest. Your own rest is not yet here. There is one final, nerve-wracking hurdle to clear before your duty is done. You must present your work for inspection. And the inspector is not a forgiving man. The footsteps you hear this time are not the loose, fading clamor of a group, but a single, deliberate tread. Heavy, measured, coming down the corridor. A familiar dread, cold and precise, settles in your stomach. It is the master armorer, Oswin. His arrival signals the end of your private labors and the beginning of the only judgment that matters. You straighten up from the table, wiping your hands hastily on your already filthy tunic, a futile gesture. You quickly arrange the pieces into a semblance of order. Breastplate here, backplate there, limbs aligned, the hauberk folded as neatly as its stubborn form will allow. The door pushes open fully, and Oswin fills the frame. He is not a large man, but he carries a density of authority that seems to warp the space around him. His forearms are thick and roped with muscle from a lifetime at the forge, and his hands are a landscape of old burns and silvery scars. His eyes, deep set under heavy brows, miss nothing. He says nothing at first, stepping into the room and letting his gaze sweep over the tableau. The tools laid out, the discarded piles of old leather and broken rings, and finally, the assembled fruits of your toil. He walks to the table, the candlelight catching the gray in his close-cropped beard. He ignores you completely. This is not personal, it is procedural. He picks up the breastplate first, his hands, so much rougher than yours, tracing the curves you spent hours restoring. He doesn't look, he feels. His fingertips glide over the area of the former dent, searching for the faintest ripple, the slightest depression. He holds it up to the candle, sighting down its surface, looking for waves in the reflection that would betray imperfect planishing. He peers at the edges you filed, running a thumb along them to test for sharpness. He checks the alignment of the rivet holes, the tension of the new leather points. His silence is a physical pressure. Next, the pauldron. He examines the blued finish over the lance scar, grunting softly, an unreadable sound. He flexes the articulation, listening for any grind or catch. He picks up the helmet. This is the piece that makes your heart hammer against your ribs. He examines the exterior, then, critically, he looks inside. He presses his thumb against the spot where you applied heat, feeling for any thinning, any softness. He works the visor up and down a dozen times, each clack hiss sounding impossibly loud. He checks the locking pin you straightened, testing it with a firm tug. Then he turns to the mail. He lifts a section of the hauberk, letting it cascade through his hands with a sound like falling coins. His fingers walk the weave, seeking out the patches you repaired. He finds one, stops, and holds the links close to his eyes, examining your riveting work, the alignment of the new rings. He tugs on them, testing their hold. You stand frozen, your breath held, awaiting the verdict that could send you back to hours of rework or, worse, earn you a cuff on the ear and a night spent redoing everything. A widely accepted historical fact is that the master armorer held a position of immense trust and responsibility, often answering directly to the lord or the knight himself. His approval was the final warranty on a man's safety. His standards were not arbitrary. They were born of the grim understanding that a failed rivet, a hidden crack, or a poorly set strap could mean a funeral rather than a victory celebration. His inspection is, in its way, a more rigorous test of the armor than the tournament itself. He moves through the rest of the pieces with the same silent, thorough intensity. The gauntlets, the greaves, the couters, the tassets. He tests every strap, checks every buckle, flexes every joint. The inspection takes 20 minutes. It feels like 20 hours. Finally, he sets the last piece, a polished sabaton for the foot, back on the table. He turns his head and looks at you for the first time. His expression is unreadable in the flickering light. The bluing on the pauldron is uneven at the seam, he says, his voice a low rasp like a file on stone. You rush the charcoal. Your heart sinks. And here, he continues, pointing to a strap on the fold, this rivet is proud. It will wear against the gambeson and fray it. He picks up the helmet again. The interior padding tie at the crown is loose. It will shift in a blow. He lists each flaw not with anger, but with the cold precision of a clerk noting inventory discrepancies. Each one is a tiny failure, a crack in your perceived perfection. But then he sets the helmet down. The dent in the skull is well taken out. No thinning. He nods at the hauberk. Your mail work is adequate. The rings are closed clean. He looks over the whole set once more. The polish is deep. No lazy streaks. He turns fully to you now, his dark eyes holding yours. You have attended to the whole of it. You saw the work, and you did the work. He gives a single, slow nod. It will serve. 3 words. It will serve. No praise, no celebration. Just the professional acknowledgement that the tool is fit for its purpose. It is the highest compliment he will ever give. The tension floods out of you, leaving you light-headed with relief. He turns and walks toward the door, pausing on the threshold. Without looking back, he says, "Clean your tools. Stow the harness on the form in the corner. The knight will want to see it after prime." And then he is gone, his footsteps receding up the corridor, leaving you alone in the candlelit silence with the approved, gleaming armor and the profound, bone-deep fatigue of a duty discharged. The silence after Oswin's departure is qualitatively different from all the silences that came before. It is no longer the silence of impending labor, of deep focus, or of anxious waiting. It is the silence of aftermath. The pressure is gone. The judgment has been passed, and you have, against your own private doubts, been found sufficient. For a long moment, you simply stand there, letting the relief wash through your aching muscles, listening to the quiet pop and settle of the dying forge embers and the distant, final calls of birds outside in the violet twilight. You look at the armor. It is no longer a task, a collection of problems. It is a singular entity again, a harness. The pieces, which spent the afternoon scattered like dismembered limbs, now seem to belong together. Under Oswin's critical gaze, they were validated. Now, under your own tired gaze, they are transformed. You see not the individual repairs, but the whole. The steel holds the candlelight not as a flat reflection, but deep within its polished curves, a liquid gleam pooled in the darkness of the blued pauldron and the helmet's shadowed interior. The leather straps are no longer just functional. They are neat, tight, and purposeful, the brass buckles winking dully. The hauberk, folded, looks like a dense, formidable textile, its repaired sections invisible in the overall weave. You begin the final tasks, moving slowly, your actions ritualistic rather than urgent. You clean your tools first, as commanded. Each file is brushed meticulously with a wire card to clear its teeth of steel dust. The hammers are wiped down with an oily rag to prevent rust. The pliers are closed and hung back on their hook. The stakes are returned to their rack. You sweep the table's surface, gathering the little piles of filings, the bits of old leather, the dead rings, into a dustpan to be discarded. This tidying is part of the craft. A messy workshop, Oswin always said, is the sign of a messy mind, and a messy mind gets men killed. You are not just putting things away, you are closing the ledger on the day's work. As you clean, your mind, finally free of immediate demands, turns inward. You think about what you have learned today, and it is not about the history of armor or the science of metallurgy, though those lessons are now etched into your muscles. You have learned the architecture of patience. You have learned that a vast, daunting project is just a sequence of small, manageable actions. Find the dent, heat the iron, tap, tap, tap. Find the broken link, open, weave, close. You have learned that frustration is not a signal to stop, but a fog to be worked through, one careful motion at a time, until the fog clears and the work is revealed, done. You have learned the humility of maintenance. The knight may win the glory, but his victory is built upon a pyramid of unglamorous care. The stable hands grooming, the fletchers straightening, the cooks provisioning, and your own aching, greasy-fingered repair. A widely accepted historical fact is that the medieval military machine was a logistical nightmare, and its effectiveness relied on these countless, often invisible acts of sustenance and repair. You are a tiny, essential cog in that machine, and today you have turned without squeaking. A lesser-known, slightly amusing historical detail is that many squires, after years of such service, developed an almost supernatural ability to identify their knight's armor by touch, sound, and smell alone, a familiarity born of intimate, tedious hours of handling. You realize you could probably pick Sir Everard's breastplate out of a line of a dozen in the dark, just by the particular curve of its waist flare or the sound a fingernail makes on its specific polish. It is a mundane intimacy, deeper in its way than that of a servant, closer to that of a groom with a favorite horse. You lift the pieces, one by one, and carry them to the wooden armor stand in the corner, a torso form with outstretched arms. You dress it as you would dress your knight. First, the padded gambeson goes on the form, then the mail hauberk, heavy and cold. You lace the breastplate and backplate together over it, feeling the solid thump as they join. You attach the tassets at the waist. You buckle the pauldrons to the shoulders and the couters to the elbows. You strap the vambraces to the forearms, and finally, you place the gauntlets on the wooden hands. You set the sallet helmet on the form's head, visor raised. Historians still argue whether the process of donning full plate armor was a cumbersome, half-hour ordeal requiring multiple assistants, or if a trained knight and his squire, working in efficient silence, could achieve it in a few minutes, a well-rehearsed drill as critical as any swordsmanship. As you step back from the fully assembled form, you know the truth. It depends entirely on the state of the straps, the buckles, and the polish. Tonight, it would be a swift, smooth, and silent operation. The figure that stands before you in the flickering candlelight is no longer Sir Everard's damaged equipment. It is an effigy of martial power, empty yet pregnant with potential violence. It is intimidating, beautiful, and profoundly silent. Your afternoon of tedium has given birth to this stillness, this readiness. The scratches are gone, the dents are erased, the weaknesses are fortified. You have not made it new. The history is still there in the faint shadows under the polish, in the memory of the metal, but you have made it capable again. You have granted it another season, another tournament, another chance to fulfill its purpose. You blow out the candle, leaving the armor in the near darkness, a collection of deeper shadows amidst the gloom. Your part is done. You push open the army door, and the cool, damp air of the evening washes over you, carrying away the last trapped scents of vinegar, oil, and hot metal. You step into the corridor, pulling the heavy door shut behind you with a final, solid thud that echoes like a full stop at the end of a very long sentence. The stone floor is cold through the thin soles of your boots. You turn and walk slowly, your body communicating its grievances with every step, a tight pull across your shoulders, a dull ache in the small of your back, a fiery tenderness in the pads of your thumbs and fingers. You are a catalogue of the day's exertions, a living testament to the weight of steel and the persistence required to manage it. You emerge into the lower courtyard. The sky above is a deep, velvety indigo, the first pinprick stars showing themselves in the clear expanse. Torches and iron sconces gutter and flare along the walls, casting pools of wavering orange light that dance over the cobblestones and the timber-framed buildings. From the great hall, 100 yards away, you hear the muffled roar of the evening meal, the clatter of wooden trenches, the boom of laughter, the rise and fall of many voices layered into a warm, indistinct hum. It is the sound of life continuing, of community gathered, of stories being told that may or may not include the Breton knight, the split shield, the stumbling horse. That world is there, beckoning with the promise of warmth, food, and the simple animal comfort of being among others after hours of solitude. But you do not go to the hall. Not yet. You are too full of the silence, too coated in the grime of your labor. You walk instead to the stone well at the courtyard center. The bucket is heavy as you draw it up, the rope rough in your raw hands. You splash the cold, clear water on your face, gasping at the shock of it. You scrub at your hands and forearms, watching the gray, inky swirls of polish, rust, and sweat dissolve and drip away. The water is profoundly cleansing. You drink deeply from your cupped hands, the coldness clearing the last metallic dust from your throat. You lean against the cool stone of the well, looking up at the emerging stars. The fatigue is not just in your body. It has settled into your mind, a soft, heavy blanket of completion. You think of the armor standing in the dark army, a silent, sentinel shape. You think of the countless afternoons just like this one, in hundreds of manors across the land, where other squires, other armors, had performed the same rituals of repair. You are part of a long, unbroken line of maintenance, a tradition of care that stretched back to the first man who hammered out a dent in his shield. It is a lineage without glory, but one without which glory could not exist. You turn your hands over in the torchlight, examining them. They are clean now, but the red marks remain. The blister is a palpable reality. They are the hands of a craftsman, not a warrior. And in this moment, you find a quiet pride in that. You have wrestled with tangible problems today and solved them. You have taken chaos and returned it to order. You have been, in your small, specific domain, effective. The knight may wield the sword, but you have ensured the sword arm is protected. It is enough. The wind picks up, a gentle breeze that carries the smell of wood smoke from the hall's chimneys and the damp, earthy scent of the kitchen gardens. It chills your damp face, a pleasant sensation. From the stables, you hear a horse whicker softly, and a dog barks once, far away. These are the sounds of a world at rest, a world you have helped, in your infinitesimal way, to keep secure for one more day. The vast, scholarly debates about metallurgy and social pressure and the frequency of polishing fade into irrelevance. The only truth that matters now is the simple, physical truth of work done, and done well enough. You push yourself away from the well, your body groaning in protest but your spirit quiet. You take one last look at the sky, at the bright, cold pinpoints of light that have watched over countless such evenings. Then you turn and begin the slow walk across the courtyard, not towards the raucous light of the hall, but towards the quieter barracks where you sleep. You crave not company, but the solid, uncomplicated embrace of your straw pallet. The journey is short, but you take it slowly, each step a conscious release of the day's tension. The torchlight paints your shadow long and thin on the cobbles, a weary giant that shrinks and disappears as you reach the barracks door and slip inside, into a darkness blessedly free of the glint of steel. The figure in the armory stands immutable in the dark, a shell awaiting its spirit. The last embers in the forge sigh and collapse into a mound of grey ash. The tools hang in perfect order on the wall, dormant. Your own hands, now still, have ceased their endless motion. The tapping, the filing, the rubbing, the pulling. The afternoon's symphony of tedious sounds has dwindled into a silence so deep you can hear the slow settling of the ancient stones around you, the whisper of your own breath finding its resting rhythm. And so we leave that dim, earthy room, with its smells of oil and effort. We leave the silent, gleaming harness on its stand, a promise of tomorrow's exertions. The knight will don it in the crisp light of morning, and it will become an extension of his will, a second skin of purpose. But for now, in this hushed interval between labors, it is merely metal and leather, resting. The dents are gone. The rings are whole. The straps are fast. The work is complete. Let the memory of that rhythmic, purposeful toil, the gentle tick of the hammer, the soft hiss of the polishing cloth, the patient click of the pliers, lull you now. There is a profound peace to be found not in the clamor of the field, but in the quiet satisfaction of a thing made right, a fracture mended, a duty faithfully discharged. It is the peace of the craftsman, the steward, the keeper of the fragile shell. Your own shell, your body, hums with a tiredness that is sound and honest. Let the weight of it pull you down into the soft embrace of your own rest, as deep and quiet as the armory at midnight. The armor is mended. The watch, for now, is over.